Chuck Norris never expected Bruce Lee's final words to haunt him for decades. But he's finally sharing what Bruce warned him about, and why no one took it seriously until it was too late. It wasn't a quote from a movie. It wasn't a farewell. It was something Bruce said quietly, deliberately, that Chuck couldn't make sense of at the time. But years later, after the world changed and Bruce was gone, it all came rushing back. And what he realized shook him to the core. Now, after staying silent for so long, Chuck is finally ready to expose Bruce Lee's final warning and the chilling truth behind it. Because if we'd listened back then, things might have been very different today. Before there was legend, before there was rivalry, there was respect. Chuck Norris and Bruce Lee weren't just two of the most recognizable names in martial arts. They were brothers in the fight to bring Eastern philosophy and Western grit together on the global stage. But what most people don't realize is that behind the fast fists and camera-ready kicks, there was a bond that ran much deeper than Hollywood ever showed. It all began in the late 1960s. Bruce had already begun to make waves in America with his magnetic presence and revolutionary speed. Chuck was a fierce competitor in karate tournaments, building a reputation for precision and discipline. They came from two completely different worlds: Bruce, with his lightning-fast Jeet Kune Do, and Chuck, a student of traditional Korean Tang Soo Do and Shotokan karate. But instead of seeing each other as threats, they saw something else: potential. A rare kind of respect sparked between them, born not just from skill but from philosophy. Bruce believed martial arts was a constantly evolving process. Chuck believed in structure and repetition. And yet, their ideas began to complement each other. Where Bruce was fluid, Chuck was solid. Where Chuck was grounded, Bruce was electric. Their collaboration culminated in one of the most iconic fight scenes in cinema history, Way of the Dragon, 1972. It was raw, unfiltered, and deeply personal. Shot in the shadowed ruins of the Colosseum in Rome, the scene is still hailed today as one of the greatest cinematic martial arts moments of all time. But what made it legendary wasn't just the choreography. It was the unspoken connection, the real respect that crackled through every punch. And yet, off-camera, there was something else happening. Something that's rarely talked about. Bruce, despite his rise, had begun to sense a shift in the industry, in the philosophy of martial arts, and in the people around him. He didn't say it loudly, but one day, in a private moment, he said something to Chuck that would stay with him forever. They'll try to take the soul out of it. They'll turn it into noise. Chuck didn't know what Bruce meant. Not fully. Not then. But he would. Years later, Chuck would admit that Bruce's words felt heavy. Not dramatic. Not paranoid. Just quiet. Like someone trying to put something into words he hadn't fully figured out yet. He was looking past me, Chuck once said. Like he was watching the future. What Bruce warned Chuck about wasn't a fight or a competitor. It wasn't about contracts or roles. It was about the future of martial arts itself. Bruce believed that martial arts was on the verge of becoming a fake. He had already begun to see it. Studios demanding flash over substance, fight scenes becoming dance routines, and a generation of actors learning choreography without philosophy. He worried that the core values, discipline, humility, purpose, would be stripped away in favor of spectacle. One day, Bruce had said, they'll forget what it means. They'll love the moves, but they won't understand the soul. Chuck remembered thinking Bruce was maybe just frustrated, burned out from trying to fight a system that didn't get him. But in the years that followed, he saw Bruce's vision start to unfold. Martial arts schools exploded across the West, but many of them were quick belt factories. Movies became more exaggerated, more commercialized, and more disconnected from the true essence of what martial arts once stood for. And Chuck, who had built his life on structure, tradition, and integrity, started to feel it too. He wasn't just warning me, Chuck would later say. He was trying to protect something. But Bruce's voice was silenced far too soon. And the warning? It got buried under fame, flash, and myth. Until now, there's a side to Bruce Lee most people don't see. Yes, he was confident. Yes, he moved like lightning. But behind that explosive presence was a man deeply aware of how fragile his mission really was. By the early 1970s, Bruce was being pulled in every direction. Family, fame, business, his health, and his endless obsession with refining Jeet Kune Do. But underneath it all, he carried something else. Fear. Not fear of failure. Not even fear of death. Fear of being misunderstood. Bruce had spent years building a bridge between cultures, between ancient Eastern philosophy and modern Western thinking. He poured his heart into Jeet Kune Do, a system without a system, a formless form that rejected tradition and embraced adaptability. But what he told Chuck, privately offset without any cameras rolling, was that he feared what would come after him. He feared the imitators, the opportunists, the hollow versions of everything he stood for. They'll teach the kicks, they'll wear the uniform, but they won't teach the mind. To Bruce, martial arts was never about looking good. It was about becoming whole, through pain, repetition, patience, and stillness. But he saw a future where people would want results without reflection, belts without discipline, speed without understanding. Chuck listened. He nodded, but he admits now he didn't fully hear it. Not then. I was younger, focused on tournaments, teaching, building schools. I didn't see what he saw, but he wasn't wrong. In fact, Chuck believes Bruce saw what martial arts would become. He saw the rise of ego over honor, entertainment over ethics, influence over integrity. And when Bruce passed, so did the voice that tried to warn everyone. But Chuck never forgot, because the warning wasn't loud. It was quiet, personal, and haunting. And as the years went by, Chuck found himself looking back at that moment, not as a memory, but as a message. One he wasn't ready to hear then, but could no longer ignore. It wasn't supposed to be a final goodbye. When Chuck Norris last saw Bruce Lee in person, there was no grand moment, no long embrace, no final scene with dramatic music in the background. Just two men, brothers in spirit, sharing time, conversation, and unspoken mutual respect. Chuck recalls that Bruce seemed different that day. Not physically, he was still sharp, still intense, but emotionally distant, like his mind was elsewhere. There was a quietness to him, almost like he was carrying something too heavy to say aloud. He was there, but he wasn't, Chuck once said. He was thoughtful, focused, like something was weighing on him. They talked about film, training, philosophy. Bruce, always hungry for evolution, had new ideas about blending meditation with movement, about breaking free from rigid schools of thought. Chuck mostly listened. He could tell Bruce wasn't venting, he was warning. But at the time, Chuck still couldn't grasp just how serious he was. Then Bruce paused. He looked Chuck in the eye and said something that Chuck would carry with him for the rest of his life. "Promise me something," Bruce said. "Don't let them twist it. Don't let them turn it into something it's not." Chuck, confused, asked what he meant. Bruce just shook his head. "You'll see. When I'm gone, you'll see." Chuck gave his word, not fully understanding what he was agreeing to. He thought it was just another one of Bruce's philosophical musings. But the way Bruce said it, the intensity behind his voice, it stayed with him. Days later, Bruce was gone. The news shattered the world. A sudden cerebral edema, they said. He was only 32. But for Chuck, it was more than a loss. It was unfinished business. A moment frozen in time. A last conversation that suddenly meant everything. That was the moment, Chuck would later reflect. The moment I realized, he knew. Chuck Norris didn't rush to the media. He didn't write a tell-all. He didn't use Bruce's death to promote anything. He went quiet, and for years he said nothing about that final warning. Why? Because he wasn't ready, and the world wasn't either. In the years following Bruce's death, the martial arts world exploded. His films became mythic. His face was everywhere, from posters to lunchboxes. The world turned Bruce Lee into a symbol, a brand, a larger-than-life icon. But Chuck remembered the man, not the legend, not the superstar, the man who pulled him aside and whispered a warning. "I didn't want it to seem like I was using his name," Chuck said. "That was sacred to me." But over the decades, Chuck watched the world change, just like Bruce said it would. Martial arts, once built on discipline and inner strength, was being repackaged into flashy stunts and shallow entertainment. Martial arts schools were popping up with 4-year-olds earning black belts. Fighters talked more than they trained. Movies became louder, faster, and emptier, and Bruce's message got lost in the noise. "I started to see it," Chuck admitted. "He warned me about all of this, and I kept quiet. For too long." Chuck didn't speak because the world wasn't listening, and maybe part of him hoped he wouldn't have to, that things would correct themselves. But when he realized Bruce's words were becoming more relevant, not less, he knew it was time, not to capitalize, not to sell something, but to honor a promise made in the quiet shadows of a private moment. "I told him I'd protect it," Chuck said. "So now I'm doing that. I'm telling the truth. Because it's not too late, but it's getting close." So now, after decades of silence, Chuck Norris is speaking up. Not about Bruce's fights or fame, but his fears. He's sharing what Bruce saw coming, what he tried to prevent, and why we need to listen now before the art loses its soul completely. Bruce Lee's final warning, as revealed by Chuck Norris, didn't just stir memories. It woke something up. Since Chuck began sharing the truth on talk shows, in interviews, and now more recently in private lectures, the response has been overwhelming. Not from the media, not from tabloids, but from the people who matter most to this legacy. Martial artists, veterans, teachers, students, fighters, men who grew up idolizing Bruce Lee and who built their discipline around what he represented. They weren't shocked by the warning. They were ashamed that they hadn't seen it sooner. "He was right," one traditional karate teacher said. "We let it slip. We got distracted by belts and branding. We forgot the philosophy." UFC fighters began revisiting Bruce's original writings. "Be water," they say again now, not just as a metaphor for flexibility in the ring, but for how to live, how to adapt, how to remain calm in chaos. In countless dojos and academies, instructors are reintroducing meditation, journaling, stillness, all the things Bruce feared would be lost in a world obsessed with speed and flash. And Chuck, quiet, disciplined, ever respectful, continues to speak not just with his voice, but with his example. He's gone back to teaching the core values Bruce held dear. No cameras, no viral stunts, just intention, practice, presence. "This isn't about going backward," Chuck said recently. "It's about going deeper." Because in the end, Bruce's final warning wasn't just for Chuck. It was for all of us. Chuck Norris could have easily let Bruce Lee's memory be what the world wanted. Cool fight scenes, iconic screams, legendary speed. But that wasn't who Bruce was to him. To Chuck, Bruce was a thinker, a visionary, a brother, a protector of something pure. Bruce's hands were weapons, but his mind? That was the real weapon. And Chuck says it's time we remembered that. He wasn't just trying to entertain us. He was trying to teach us, to wake us up, to show us how to be better. Inside, before anything outside. Bruce believed that martial arts was a way of living, not a sport. Not a performance, but a constant internal war between ego and humility, fear and strength, noise and silence. And maybe that's why his final words hit Chuck so hard. Because they weren't technical. They weren't about moves or muscle. They were about meaning. "Don't let them twist it," Bruce had said. "Teach it right. You'll see." And now Chuck sees. That's why he's telling this story. Not for attention, not for nostalgia, but because the warning is still echoing. Bruce Lee didn't just give the world unforgettable movies. He gave Chuck Norris a warning. And now, decades later, Chuck is finally passing that message on. Not to impress anyone, but to keep a promise. A promise made not in front of the cameras, but in a quiet moment between two men who loved the art, the philosophy, and the fight for something real. "He said I'd see it one day," Chuck whispered. "I just didn't know it would take me this long. But maybe now we're finally ready to hear it. Because if we let Bruce's final warning fade into the noise, then maybe we didn't just lose a fighter. Maybe we lost the one voice who saw it all coming and tried to save it before it was too late." For more of the latest news, check out this video.